Coming up on this episode of Belief Hole.
There's cultures all around the world that have these stories of these beings that live alongside us, parallel to us, but can choose to be seen or not. They're always the same sorts of stories where it's like drums pounding in the distance at night. These creatures seem to be hospitable at first and take you in. And it's just interesting how it plays through in different cultures. And it reminds me of old fae folk stories.
Right, fairies
in the woods where people are taken for a while and the time doesn't seem to pass.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden it's days later and then they find themselves out with not much of an exact remembrance of what happened.
Reminds me of Hansel and Gretel, which is so scary.
Where, the old woman wants to eat them.
Wants to eat them?
Cook them in the oven.
That's so terrifying. Like, if that was real, like, I just want to eat you.
Maybe it was based off a real story.
Cannibals in the woods.
Yeah, or creatures pretending to be humans.
Yeah, well, that's the whole crux.
There are a lot of stories where seemingly healthy trees will fall on prey or will flush out prey or almost like threatening the hunter.
That's creepy.
Yeah, like there's something invisible that's using that as a tool.
I think everybody's probably heard this theory that it's evolutionary, right? Like the reason why we fear the forest, the reason why we have these ideas of monsters is that they're all sort of extrapolated from ancient and very real concerns about, having to hide from big cats and poisonous snakes, things like that, which I think you can make that argument. But I also think, especially after diving into Paulides' research, that there's a case to be made that something else, something darker, something more mysterious is going on.
That we don't dare think about too long. Conspiracy,
synchronicity, Sasquatch,
Donald Trump,
alien races, Satanism in Hollywood, MK Ultra,
Pleiadians,
Mandela effect.
Close the door, Ed.
Jeremy, close your door!
Snowflakes,
Inner Earth, disagreements,
my lab,
JFK assassination,
Flat Earth.
Corey Feldman, magicians are demons, specters and
Benghazi.
spooks, sleep paralysis, Muslim Islamicists, the gender spectrum, alternative history, shadow people,
Quiet, I'm trying to say words with the mouth.
psilocybin, sorcery, poltergeist, sulforaphane, evolution, is it real?
Skull and Bones. I would never talk about it. That's old. Y2K.
Cover-ups, the Oklahoma City bombing, vampire.
Should we go?
Let's do it.
Hi.
Well, hello.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, everybody, to
Yep.
episode, you want to say it?
Yeah, can I say it?
Go for it.
14, guys.
14. Keeping it clean.
Yeah, I'm started to lose count. I thought this was 13. Once we get into double
That's because
digits.
you can't count.
I know.
Past, what, is it 12?
I get up there sometimes.
Did you ever tell the story about how you had to take Discovery Math in school?
Not on the air, but we can.
Discovery
I didn't
Math.
discover much math in that
I guess it
class.
wasn't.
Let's get the fire going.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Well, that works for this episode.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be talking about some creepy stuff.
We are going to be talking about missing persons from national parks and
Other places around the globe.
Primarily in the wilderness.
primarily in the wilderness. Yes, some creepy stuff.
Yes, and what makes these missing person experiences interesting is that they seem to have somewhat abnormal patterns around them. And some inexplicable facts related to the death of the person or the way the body is or
just the disappearance.
yeah,
And the
unexplained.
inexplicable. Yeah, this comes from David Paulides.
It's Paulides.
See, okay, this is crazy.
No.
I was
Yeah.
listening to a really good podcast with David Paulides, who that's how I
thought it was
heard
Paulides.
But he pronounced it Pilates.
No.
Like he's like coming up. Which this was a great show. Like,
Who?
I'm going to link in the episode.
You mean the guy interviewing him pronounced it Pilates?
Yeah, it was a hunting podcast. It was really good.
Pilates.
But he called him David Paulides. I was like, that can't be right. I'm pretty sure it's Paulides or Paulides. I've heard it multiple ways.
Yeah, but he's the guy who...
I heard it's Paulides.
Palladian?
Anyways.
Palladian? Anyway, yeah, he's the guy who kind of brought this whole situation into focus.
Right. So what we're talking about, when we talk about what we're bringing into focus, it's the idea of the missing cases of people that we have not heard about. The reports of people that have gone missing that they've kind of kept under wraps. There's just been no coverage on it really. Like you hear about people going missing all the time in the wilderness. Like it's a news headline,
Right.
and then it fades away and you don't hear anything else. And you would assume that there would be a record of how many people have gone missing in the parks, right?
Yes, that's the strange part.
Right, and yes, as we will come to find out throughout the course of the episode, there are no records kept, thanks to the efforts of David Paulides.
And he is an ex-police officer.
Yes.
And he has some credibility as far as
he was an investigator.
Yeah. And I love this guy. He reminds me of like your best friend's dad in the 90s. He's just a guy, and he's got like the cop mustache,
the commish.
You know, the nice brown coiffed hair.
He's keeping that mustache going.
Yeah, like I'd like to have a beer with Dave sometime.
Yeah,
it'd be fun. But I've been wanting to cover this topic since we started the show because I think this is one of the more interesting because it's kind of a newer phenomenon, not new in the way that it's occurred for centuries, but the way that it's become sort of a hot topic because of David Paulides.
Right.
And I think definitely one of the most fascinating.
It really definitely conjures up a lot of images too, because, we all have natural primal fears that exist from being in the woods, lost. Like there's all sorts of weird stuff that can happen out there.
Yeah. Well, you just go out in the woods and you can feel it.
I mean, we are so, in society now.
So protected.
We've lost a lot of that kind of natural edge that being out in the woods gives us. So anytime I go back in there, especially if it's deep in the woods, like if I do a deep hike, like there's something very magical, mysterious about being in the deep wilderness.
And I have a theory, and it's speculative only, but I had this theory recently, just walking in the woods at night, like, we don't live in the woods, but we live in a kind of a rural area, and there's patches of woods around our house. But
Are you talking about Mom and Dad's house?
Yeah, Mom and Dad's house. Yeah, I mean, I don't live there anymore, but, growing up there, and it's just a very thin patch of tree line between our house and neighboring houses, and I had this feeling, I always had this feeling growing up, that when you could walk through the woods during the day, and, you're not going to be scared. Like, I can see the edge. Ooh, that was scary. I love this sound. But you can see like the edge of the tree line, right? Like, and it extends further where you can't see the edge in certain directions. But some ways you face in those woods by Mom and Dad's house, you can see like the boundary, like, oh, I can just walk out, it'll be fine. But when you're passing through that small patch of woods, it feels like something changes at night. Almost like something exists there in the dark that doesn't exist there during the day. And even then, thick, deep woods during the day have that same kind of foreboding, ominous feeling to it. And I don't know if it's just because you can't see as much, but it just feels like, what if there is something that just like manifests?
Even during the day, I feel like walking in the forest during the day, even when you're not super in the middle of nowhere, but even going to like a local reserve or something and you're not too far away, even at Mom and Dad's, like you're talking about, even during the day, there's sometimes when I'm walking, you just feel, and like you can argue this is because
you're a coward.
There's animals out there. No, I didn't say I was
You're
afraid.
A fence sitter?
Sorry.
But sorry, Chris. Awesome. No, the feeling that you're being observed.
Right.
And I mean, obviously, like there's other animals in there, so I'm sure that's part of the psychological thing they're going on.
You can feel the vision of the owl,
right,
staring down at you.
But
dogmen are out there too.
Absolutely.
Well,
That's kind of terrifying.
That's been proven.
And just, there aren't bears anymore, but in our DNA, like, there was some scary shit.
There aren't bears anymore?
Well, not really where
like
we
in this
live.
area, in Ohio. Well, I mean, some, but yeah, not.
I mean, wild animals are monsters in their own right.
Right.
So just having that sort of sense of there's always something potentially that could kill you around the corner.
Right, it's a protective response.
It's funny because synchronistically, we were having a conversation with a friend last night, and we were talking about the possibility, or why people are afraid in the forest, and the fear of monsters and how much of that is, because his argument, I think everybody's probably heard this theory that it's evolutionary, right? Like the reason why we fear the forest, the reason why we have these ideas of monsters is that they're all sort of extrapolated from ancient and very real concerns about having to hide from big cats and poisonous snakes, things like that, and that today all our fear of monsters in the dark and things like that all go back to the evolutionary thing, which I think you can make that argument, but I also think, especially after diving into Paulides' research, that there's a case to be made that there's a good chance that something else, something darker, something more mysterious is going on.
Right, yeah. These inexplicable accounts that we have not been able to solve.
That we don't dare think about too long.
But yeah, it just made me think like those old stories about, the old Grimm's fairy tales and things you tell about like the witch in the forest, things like that, to keep kids safe. What if that's still a necessity, not because they need to just not get lost in the forest, but because there are things in the forest that are very real and very monstrous.
Besides bears and snakes. Okay, so that's what we're going to be getting into. Do we want to do some news first?
I think we should. So I found some. I just grabbed a couple articles because I know this episode's going to be very story heavy with the missing 411 stuff. So I just got two here.
Okay.
Which one do you want to hear first?
That one.
Okay.
That one.
All right. This is from Gizmodo.com. Puzzling Montana shooting blamed on Sasquatch mistake. Quote, I thought you were Bigfoot.
That was his defense?
Yeah. Okay.
That's a good
court?
defense.
Yeah.
Authorities say a man in Montana was almost shot by a still unidentified gunman who claimed he mistook the victim for the elusive mythical beast known as Bigfoot. The Idaho Statesman reports that the Helena resident told police he was preparing for target practice on public lands when someone started shooting at him on Sunday. Lewis and Clark County Sheriff Leo Dutton told the news outlet that the man said that one bullet missed him by only 3 feet.
Incredible.
After the gunman...
Nice.
Learn to read, sir. After the gunfire died down, the victim reportedly approached the man who was shooting at him. According to Dutton, the victim told police the shooter, who was in a black Ford F-150, said, quote, I thought you were Bigfoot, clarifying, I don't target practice, but if I see something that looks like Bigfoot, I shoot at it.
Oh, wow. That's real smart.
Yeah.
That says go to. If I see something like Bigfoot, I shoot it.
The victim reportedly said he wasn't Bigfoot, and the shooter responded by telling him to wear orange. According to Dutton, there was initially, quote, some question about the veracity of the account, but after news stories about the shooting came out, a woman reported a similar experience to law enforcement. She said a man in a black F-150 shot at her, but he made no mention of Bigfoot when he approached him. When she approached him.
You need to go learn to read again.
Well, that's what editing's for. Quote, we're working to find this person, Dutton told the Statesman. It is of great concern that this individual might think it's okay to shoot at anything he thinks is Bigfoot.
Incredible.
Sounds like he does.
Which is pretty ridiculous. There is a rift within the cryptozoological community about whether or not it is ethical to kill Bigfoot.
Right.
Well, we know this is
I think the predominant feeling is that it's not ethical to shoot.
I agree, but apparently there's
Unless it's
don't know what
self-defense.
it is?
If it's self-defense.
Just running out in the distance.
yeah.
even if you think it's Bigfoot,
Shoot it.
Yeah, but Bigfoot looks like a man. It's a walking upright.
Giant man.
Well,
usually.
there have been people who have been killed because they've been in costume. There was
Yeah.
one guy who was intentionally run over because he came
Oh,
out and
wow.
was like, rawr, and he was like, I'll fucking get
Kind of
this.
his fault.
Yeah. Yeah,
I wonder
kind
when that's going to start happening with those
Sounds
clowns.
like a wah wah.
Sir, do you know Jim Lansdale?
Yeah.
He's have you heard his name? He's the co-founder of the Gulf Coast Bigfoot Research Organization.
Not familiar.
And star of the reality show Killing Bigfoot.
What? That's a show?
Yeah. He told
Ooh.
Gizmodo in March that his objective is to, quote, harvest a body and take it to science.
Ouch.
When asked how he would kill Bigfoot, Lansdale said he would use a, quote, heavy-duty rifle. To be clear, Lansdale, who is based in the American South, has no known connection to this incident.
Can you imagine if your mission was to harvest a dolphin and give it to science, and you started an organization called Killing Dolphins?
Well, that's the name.
It's okay if it's Bigfoot.
That's not the name. That's the name of the show, I guess.
Well, still, you can have a show called Killing Dolphins.
right. Well, it's definitely it's compelling.
It's because
It's a sexy
because
name.
people don't believe he's real that you can have a. But that's so. I'm offended.
I am too.
I think most people in the Bigfoot community say you don't shoot Bigfoot
Yeah.
unless it's
Well, you don't know what it
self-defense.
is,
Right?
you know. And then
In his defense,
and if it's magical,
in his defense,
what can he do to you?
What if he decides after all the communal pressure to not shoot at Bigfoot, he comes across an angry Bigfoot and he doesn't shoot? In his defense, that's not the
Like the boy
worst
who
way to go
cried
about it.
wolf?
Exactly. Yeah.
The boy who cried
The-
Bigfoot?
The boy who protected himself by shooting wolves that were people, and then never shot the actual wolf.
interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought that was
Complicated
an
analogy, but
somewhat relevant story to today's episode, just because we're talking about things in the forest.
yeah, no, that's definitely interesting.
This last article I have
It's
is
your favorite topic too, Bigfoot.
That's not at all true, but I know you like to say that.
John just
'Cause
thinks
you are not
Bigfoot's
interested in
dumb,
it.
so
That's true. He does.
Incredible.
He says it's your favorite. What is next, Chris?
You guys like that one?
Incredible.
Not anymore because you played it 3 times.
It gets funnier with each play.
Overkill. That's true. Actually, I think there's like a special quota that it reaches where it's funny, and then if you go too far, it's not funny. You have to like find that. But I think
But
you
then
got
you
to
have
that
to
point.
go again, go further.
Right,
That's
if
actually
it
Art
gets-
Bell. Did you know that?
That was,
Oh, really?
Play it again.
Oh, the late and great Art Bell.
Incredible.
Yeah, that is Art. Wow. Yeah, he's one of my faves.
All right, what's the next story?
This one has nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but I just thought it was kind of funny. Or interesting, or maybe neither. The headline here is Leo DiCaprio's, I like how people call him Leo now. Leo DiCaprio's rumored plan to
they're
buy...
a first name,
Right.
shortened name basis.
This is from Live Science. Leo DiCaprio's rumored plan to buy a dinosaur duo has paleontologists upset. Leonardo DiCaprio is rumored to be in the market for a $2.5 million dinosaur duo. A meat-eating Allosaurus, mother and babe, according to page 6 in the New York Post. If the rumor is true, the prehistoric purchase would be, quote, very disappointing, said Thomas Carr, a stick in the mud, a vertebrate paleontologist and an associate professor of biology at Carthage College in Wisconsin, who was not involved with the sale. Quote, dinosaur fossils should not be auctioned at all. Fossils are data, and they are our only means of understanding the history of life on this planet. Basically, I'm just going to summarize, but he is rumored to have been eyeballing a couple dinosaurs and is wanting to purchase
A dinosaur
them.
duo.
A dinosaur duo. I know.
News articles
one
love
of the
their
worst
alliteration.
alliterations. Yeah.
So lame.
But there's a lot of people upset if this does turn out to be true.
Because it should be saved for science.
Well, yeah, the argument is that there's only a certain amount of good specimens of
Very
Allosaur.
few.
Yeah.
Of any dinosaur, actually.
Yeah, so should he be allowed? I don't know. I'd want a dinosaur if I could afford one. But
Yeah.
I'd let people research it if they wanted to.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It reminds me of like one of those things where it's like, yeah, well, let's give all of our stuff to the Smithsonian, and where, by the way, if you want to do an independent study of these dinosaur bones, you can't. It's kept, like most of what you see in museums are actually, and I've learned this on YouTube, so it's
YouTube
real.
University, you
But
have a
no, I
degree.
think there's a lot of truth to it that you can't actually look at the original bones. Everything that we see are casts, and those plaster casts that we see of the full skeletons, usually they're based off of a few bones.
That's not true, though.
That's actually the very first dinosaur that we discovered. Which, by the way, we've discovered the first dinosaur after theorizing that they might exist. So after the first, we should do an episode of this because I think it's
Really?
interesting. There's a theory.
Is that true?
There's a conspiracy that they aren't real, that they were concocted by the evolutionists.
Jeremy's crazy corner.
Jeremy's crazy going on. Okay, so I would like to do a segment on this sometime because I haven't looked at it in a while, but it's kind of interesting. But so supposedly the original dinosaur we first found, we theorized that they were real. Then a scientist or quote paleontologist, before that was even a thing, discovered the first dinosaur. And they put it in a museum. It was this big hoopla. Oh, discovered the first specimen of theorized creature, the dinosaur.
That was in the 1800s, right? I mean, that's kind of an early.
Yeah. So, but they found it, and it turns out that they constructed this whole creature, and it was all based off of like a tooth.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that happens.
And then they add a skull and a body, and it was a fictional creature, but they had found a tooth.
Incredible.
Right? Mm-hmm. Art agrees. And if that's true, I mean, I think that's a fascinating story. And it correlates with all of the other instances of where we have bones, real fossils that you actually can't look at.
Was NASA the one that created the
NASA was
structure?
involved. Yeah.
I think it's a two-part issue there because, first of all, you've got records of people in ancient Greece discovering what they thought was dragons or whatever, because the argument is that they were probably digging up like Tyrannosaurus skulls,
right,
things like that. But the other part of that problem is, yes, there is definitely a spurless. What's that word? There's a questionable history when it comes to the origins, the beginnings of paleontology, where there were people competing to collect the most
name
fossils,
recognition, so they would invent them.
Right. But to get the name recognition, so there'd be competition, so people would often, just like you see,
have they found us?
What is going on?
I don't
know how, but they found us.
NASA.
Marty.
It's NASA.
Hide the
it's the
nuclear waste.
Smithsonian, Jeremy. Good job.
I know, seriously. But that's the thing. That's the thing too. Say dinosaurs are real. I'm going to throw that out there. Dinosaurs might be real. Okay, so I put that out there. Leo wants to buy them. Okay, here's my other argument: is the fact that
allegedly wants to buy them.
Allegedly. Okay, so he wants to buy this dinosaur duo. We have the problem, I think, of the paleontologist that was quoted that was just like grabby arms, like, no, these need to be kept for science and study. Like, I get that, but if you look at any like alternative archaeology and history, like if you look into Klaus Dana, who studies a lot of anomalies in history and archaeological finds, the public can only view them because they were kept in private collections. Because what the Smithsonian likes to do, as we all know, anyone who looks into the alternative history and giants and all that, is they collect the bones. They collect it, and then anything that doesn't fit the mold and the paradigm gets buried away in that, Ark of the Covenant basement warehouse somewhere.
Right, but it kind of sounds like the energy industry and the medical industry.
Right, everything kept under the control of the...
Right, but that makes sense for, it's like, let's say, giant bones, right? So they'll hide it if it's, you want to argue that they're keeping it from the public, that truth of history. But at the same time, if they are pushing the idea that dinosaurs exist, they would be showing the bones of the dinosaurs. And that's the other thing, is that there's partial skeletons that have been covered, not just a bone, but like there have been skulls of dinosaurs that have been discovered. So I think the argument that they never existed is kind of ridiculous.
That it's usually discovered by a archaeological group going there to discover, and then they discover it, or it's a farmer who is told to look in a certain area that has discovered. I mean, this is the dinosaurs aren't real conspiracy, which we should do an episode on. I think it's fascinating. It's fun.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
And then you could also do the mountains or giants.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other.
And volcanoes or something.
Volcanoes. Volcanoes
did
are.
I say that?
I did when I tried to repeat you. Volcanoes are ancient slag
You
pits.
said it again. Volcanoes.
What is wrong with my brain?
Volcanoes.
That's what it is, volcanoes.
The man. Okay, I'm not going to take anything you say as
Okay. Mister, I can't read a news article.
Shut up.
Chris, you do need to work on your reading skills. That was like you.
We started with discovery math, and now we're into
No, you know why? No, I'm a great reader. You know why?
No, you're not.
No, I am. You know why? What the problem
You're
is?
a great reader in your mind, but
No,
not
you know
verbalizing.
what
it.
happens is I'll read it, and as I'm reading it, I will notice Jeremy's on his phone, and you're looking at your computer, and then I get nervous. Worried you're bored, and then I get in my
dude.
head.
I was looking at the next news article. That's why I
Yeah,
was on my
that's.
phone.
I'm preparing stuff over here. I'm still listening to you.
Don't overanalyze.
Also,
what
I
we're
got
doing.
4 hours of sleep last night.
Okay, there
Well,
it is.
the funny part was you would get real choppy with it, and then you'd speed up really fast, and then you'd slow down again and be real choppy. So
Well, because I want to take my time. When I take my time, sometimes I lose the rhythm, and that's when
you're
I
like
get, that's when I get jumbled.
Let's go to a break.
Okay, let's
That's
go
a good
for
time
a
to
break.
break.
Okay.
When we come back, we will be getting into our main topic of the day, which is the strange vanishings in our national parks and around the world, and the research by David Paulides and the Missing 411. Stick around.
And we'll be back.
Attention park guests, this is Ranger Steven. We want to remind everyone, if you haven't heard, there have been several people that have gone missing over the last few months, and we really are not sure what happened to these people. They're still technically lost. It could have been Bigfoot, it could have been an alien, it could have been a crazy man with an axe. We really don't know. So, keep your family close and your pets close. Keep a visual contact with these people at all times. Use the buddy system. And we want you to have fun. But this is serious stuff, people, so keep that in mind.
Listeners, we're back.
Hi, guys. Welcome back. Jared, do you want to give a little background on how this all began?
Yeah, so I've heard kind of a couple different accounts of this, but this is, so the guy who we mentioned earlier in the beginning of the show, David Paulides, or Paulides, or Paulides.
Paulides.
Paulides, really?
That's what I heard.
Man, okay, we need to ask him how he says it.
We should have had him on.
We just need to find an interview where he's like, hi, I'm David, fill in the blank, so we know for
I
sure.
wonder if he would have come on the show.
Okay, so David Paulides, who I'm just going to say it like that because that's how I know how to say
Okay.
it. David Paulides, has a history of 20 years in law enforcement, graduated with a master's from the University of San Francisco. I think he went to Berkeley for a time, lives in Colorado. He's an author of 9 books. And there's a movie that came out recently.
Oh, it was really good.
That I think his son actually was the filmmaker behind the movie. It's called Missing 411, which is the precursory name for all of his books. Missing 411.
Do you have, John, you haven't
Hunters.
seen that, have you? The Missing 411 documentary. It's really well done.
This is an interesting point. As I was reading I was trying to find just basic facts on his history and stuff, and so I looked at the Wikipedia article for David Paulides.
Good place to start.
Well, this is what's funny. So I'm reading the Wikipedia article, and it says things like David Paulides is a former police detective who is now an investigator and writer known primarily for his self-published books dedicated to proving the reality of, quote, Bigfoot. Okay, so, and for his Missing 411 series of books. Okay, so this is interesting. So I as I'm looking at this, I see at the bottom that it's been, of course, Wikipedia is always edited, right? So I look to see, well, what was the most recent edit? Most recent edit was from an administrator under the name Anarchist,
And he removed a few things, to make it more accurate, quote. And one of the things that he removed was an investigator and writer known primarily for his work, including 2 self-published books dedicated to proving the reality of Bigfoot and Missing 411, which speculates on disappearances, etc. He removed work including 2 self-published books and changed it to just writer known primarily for his self-published books.
Oh.
And making it sound like he's only self-published.
Right.
And then later was interesting.
Well, that's weird because it kind of dovetails into, I don't know if you were going to talk more about him, about how he,
can't talk now.
Part of the reason he couldn't get access to those documents is because
we're going to talk about that, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so beyond that, shortly on the same paragraph, it says, Paulides attributes Paulides attributes mysterious...
Attributes?
It's
not just me.
It's like the same word, right?
Neat.
Paulides attributes mysterious, unspecified causes to these disappearances, and this was the original, while data analyst Kyle Pollock has analyzed Paulides' data and concluded that statistically these disappearances are not mysterious. Okay, so he
added that in?
He edited that to say, while data analysis suggests that these disappearances are not mysterious. In other words, he removed it being the analysis of one man who suggested they are mysterious and just changed it to data analysis suggests these disappearances are not statistically mysterious. So in other words,
why is there's just this conspiracy to hush all
anything that's different from
so
mainstream
bizarre.
paradigm? It's just so weird. So
we live in a hologram.
And this is supposed to be, so this is Wikipedia, a lot of people use it as reference, this is the best minds of people who are protecting the legitimacy of data, but it's obvious that there's a difference between one guy suggesting that analyze the data and suggests it's not mysterious versus analysis suggests.
Stating it as a general fact.
Right. That's just
I know. I feel
really rubs me the wrong way.
I feel like, it's good to have healthy skepticism, but I do feel like people who are passionately skeptic on everything, I feel there's almost this sort of...
It's a religion in itself.
Exactly. It's this sort of there almost an aggression against someone who
I feel like there's some people that
right.
are just so terrified to see that anything's out of place in the world that they cling to the fabric of normalcy.
Right.
They just cannot even imagine that there's things outside of the narrow box.
Well, yeah,
right.
And for a lot of people, it's too complicated. They want it to be cut and dry, things are real or they're not.
Right.
As opposed to there are possibilities and maybe we could explore them, but no, it's a waste of time, or I don't have,
I think it comes from a fear, honestly.
I think for a lot of people it does.
I think they're just too afraid to admit that there's things beyond our control in this world and things that we can't explain.
Right. Well, that's a good analysis tangent to go down, but to get back into Paulides. So yeah, I'll kind of give you a brief overview. Yeah, history in investigation, former police investigator. But how he got all into this was he had retired, but he still had that investigative urge. So he had written some articles and he was exploring some topics in a national park. And while he was in the park, he was being followed around by a couple rangers.
Mm-hmm.
And
it was a park he was investigating?
Yeah.
For some reason?
Yeah. And they came to his door.
Was it Ranger Steven?
Might have been Ranger Steven, who, that's why he was familiar with the issue and warned us at the beginning of the show. We need to get him back on, by the way.
Yeah,
Ranger
Steven.
Steven.
He'll be back.
So late at night, while at this park investigating whatever topics he was investigating, he gets a knock on the door. And it's those two rangers that were following around earlier, and they told him that they had dealt with some missing persons cases. And at the initial, there's a big hubbubaloo. It goes up in the news.
Second time you used that word.
Did I use that word earlier? Hubbubaloo?
That's a good one.
Yeah, thank you. So they were investigating. There was a big to-do in the news.
You were going to say it again.
I was going to say it again. But then quickly after, it fades away. They don't find the people or whatever, and it disappears. It's like it never happened. There's no follow-up. Very bizarre.
That's very common in these situations.
Right, but they approach him, because they know he's looking into things in the park, and they told him we want to know more. It's surprising there's no more follow-up. So at that point, David submits a Freedom of Information request from the Park Service. So instead of getting an approval letter or a letter of denial, they're not going to give him the information, he gets a phone call from their lawyer, which is odd. And they asked David, I'm curious, why do you want to know? And he's like, well, I don't really need to tell you. it's it's for research, but
Freedom of Information Act.
It's not part of the requirements.
Yeah, there's not a need to know. If you're a published author, you should or if you just filing the information. I'm not exactly sure the specifics, but regardless, the lawyer says, "So I'm just out of my curiosity, I'd like to know." And he's like, "Well, I'm just doing research. I'm a published author, and I'm working on a book or whatever." And the guy says, "Well, we don't have that kind of information on file. We don't keep records of missing people,"
which is ridiculous,
right? And so David says, "Well, I'm a published author, and under the Freedom of Information Act, you can gather the information." And it sounded like it would be covered under the Freedom of Information Act, like the cost or whatever. Yeah, to do that and provide it to me is covered under the Freedom of Information Act in this request. And the guy said, "Okay, well, let me see what I can do, and I'll call you back." And then he calls him back shortly, and he tells him that, "Well, you're a published author, but you're not in enough libraries," which is what you referenced earlier. Yeah, which is not actually a qualification that you need in order to file the request or to to get the information as a published author. There's no amount of library number that you need to be in with your books in order to get the information provided.
Well, the weird thing is, I thought when you told me that earlier, I thought what was so hilarious about that is you're going to tell me that there's a national cross-reference checklist on how many books are in each library at any given time, but there's not a cross-reference list of how many, when people disappear and families lose family members. That's not an important list, but how many books are in each library which no one goes to anymore?
Which I'm sure there probably isn't even.
He also mentioned, I heard an interview where he's talking about, like, they kept lists of things like what movies were shot in national parks, just like silly things.
But
they don't keep track of the people that have gone missing.
That
really
seems
strange.
so unbelievable.
Well,
to me.
so after this, he was skeptical, obviously, and he talked to his friend George Knapp, who we actually talked about.
He talked to a bunch of investigative journalists too.
Yeah.
And they said there's no way on earth that they don't have lists.
Right.
Of
He
that
said
stuff.
you should go back and check again.
Yeah.
And so he did again, and same response. And they told him that we can get the information for you, but what was it like for this park? It's going to cost
$27,000 for Yosemite.
30-something thousand.
30-something thousand, and then if you want them for all, it was like 1.4 million.
Yeah. So if you want a list of all missing people for all the national parks, it's going to be $1.4 million to gather that information, which is insane.
Yeah.
That there isn't already a list because those parks are full of law enforcement officers.
They'd have to be completely negligent in their job.
I would think so. Like, how is that not a requirement?
Especially since it's not a small number of people.
Right.
Well, so and that goes, what does that insinuate to us? That suggests a potential conspiracy or cover-up.
Spooky.
Right, exactly. Maybe there's a reason why. Maybe there are. That's the other thing you hear from these investigative journalists like George Knapp, who we covered on the last episode with Skinwalker Ranch, where they're saying there are lists. There absolutely are lists, but they're not going to tell you for what reason we're not clear on.
Right.
Another interesting point about that is you may get into this. I'm not sure, but it's kind of weird. It ties into like why they might be withholding information like that. But he was in one of his interviews. He talked a lot about how it seemed like a majority of these cases were either autistic people or like really highly intelligent people.
Yeah.
It wasn't always that, but there was definitely like correlation between really brilliant people and people on...
Which is interesting because autistic people are brilliant in very specific things, which makes them so good in certain things.
Yeah.
So there's that weird tie.
If you think about like why, if it was like a government program or something where they're missing people to study them, like the extremes the extremes of these personalities would be or aliens.
Well, that's the other thing. Even if it's not the government who's doing it, it's one of those situations where it makes me think of the same reason why I think you could argue maybe one of the best concepts behind why, if there is a UFO phenomenon, which I think we all can agree there is in this room,
a phenomenon,
this thing that's occurring, I think that it's reasonable to suggest that the reason why the government is not talking about it and denying that it's an issue is not necessarily because they're involved in it, but because they don't know what's going on either. And I think that could be very well the same situation in these missing cases.
And
they
don't want to admit that they don't
know.
Have it.
Right. So if
the
that's
whole Roswell sort of scenario where they know things are weird, but
they can't give you an answer. So maybe it's not
scare the public.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to keep people away from the parks. That's also revenue.
That's true. I didn't think about that possibility.
I was just going to say real quick, what you said about revenue there, it just reminds me of the thought that that thought reminds me of how when these cases occur in national parks, these happen all the time, like a lot of these cases, and they are sometimes reported publicly in the news, and it's a story, but not
for long at all. Like it just
it
fades away.
disappears.
And like you can argue that we have a really low attention span for news cycles now, but these are missing people with, people love the true crime stuff. Why don't we see these true crime things like person missing, child missing, found his shoes, found his,
Right. All the weird things that go along with it.
We might miss a Trump tweet though.
That's true. I can't miss those.
Well, we can get more into the speculation of what might be causing this feature, but let's get into some of the stories.
Let's do another quick break.
Okay.
And then, we'll get into some of the actual
Stories.
meat of the story with the stories.
We'll play some clips from David Paulides, the man himself.
Paulides.
And yeah, so look forward to that when we come back.
Cool.
Welcome back, guys.
Welcome back.
Episode,
Those are the
I meant segment 3.
Jared, did you want to get back into the? You said you want to get into some of the stories.
Yeah, I think we should probably play a clip.
Yeah, let's get a clip going.
All right.
Too many times the bodies are found in an area that was previously searched. There's one case I write about where they were looking for an 8-year-old boy in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California for 2 weeks. This is weird. And every day there were 200 searchers that took a trail up over the top of this mountain into this area where this boy was last seen. And on this second week, searchers get up at 6 a.m. and they start going out on the trail. And here's this tree, a huge Douglas fir that fell across the trail, and the boy's body is laying on top of the tree dead. They said he died of hypothermia, and one thing I couldn't get out of the coroner's office is how long the boy had been dead. So there's a lot of weird stuff that happens.
There sure is, David.
Thanks, David.
That was David Paulides.
That was a really short clip of a story.
So what happened in that story?
Okay, so yeah, a little late. That was the outro sound. So that was a really short story from David Paulides. One of his cases that he was looking into. Essentially, it was which is so crazy was it was a kid had gone missing, and they had a team of people looking for this kid, and they would go up the same trail every day to go start their search, right, and form their pattern, whatever their grid pattern, and look for this child. They searched multiple times, and on whatever time that was, they were going to do the search on the same trail they searched all the times before. A tree had fallen across the trail, and laying across the tree was the child that had been missing that they'd been searching for in that same place.
Interesting.
So there was no tree that had been fallen?
Right. A tree had fallen, and the child was laying across
That is
it.
very strange.
So almost like someone had placed it there.
Or he was in the tree,
And the tree fell over?
and the tree fell over.
he just landed perfectly on it.
And all the investigators missed that.
I guess he'd probably fall off from the force of a tree falling.
Especially if he died of hypothermia too. As the people are walking by, he's like,
Yeah,
I'm here.
Yeah, no,
Let's
that's
say
bizarre. Well, yeah, and but they could. It was interesting. The coroner wouldn't give him a time of death, like how recently he died, because that would play into that, right? Like if he had died the day that they found him versus if he had been dead and
Right.
but then the tree had fallen and he was laying across it. That's just one small story. But
What's
really,
interesting,
really strange.
the thing with these cases is the reason why they are so unique is because there are patterns, bizarre patterns that they all seem to
Right.
share. Like for example, like 3-year-old, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds being found, 5 miles or so from the missing point,
Right.
uphill, thousands of feet uphill. So for some reason, a child would go up, climb a mountain. And the argument is how in a few days did they make it up so far away? I mean, some of these situations
Right.
are so crazy.
Well, yeah, like there's a graph that I have here called distance traveled. So this is like how far some of these people have been found, a lot of them children, in a distance, and it has the time, like how long it took them to get there. And some of these are pretty bizarre. A couple examples here. You have a child the age of 11 in 1987 was found at a distance of 100 miles.
100 miles.
5 hours later.
Okay. Yeah.
And remembers nothing.
he was alive though.
Yeah. Doesn't remember anything. Was found 100 miles away.
That could have been an abduction.
Could have been, but they had found no evidence of that. and he doesn't remember anything. So it's a bizarre, but there's a lot of these, like this whole, like the list here. So there's another, in 1956, a child the age of 7 in Arizona was found 50 miles away 2 days later. So, I mean, a lot of these are inexplicable distances that a child could not travel. Some of these, the kids are like 2 years old. A child was found 20 miles away. A child the age of 4 was found 15 miles away 4 days later. The terrain covered, like some of these are like really rough terrain going uphill, and
yeah, so
they could not have
there was
traversed
some
that area.
other interference.
Something had moved them.
Yeah.
Right. You know, whether living or dead, the child had been...
Well, okay, sorry, I didn't
or
mean to cut
that's
you
the
off.
suggestion, I guess, is that they would have been carried or moved or transported or some odd occurrence. And there's a whole list, pages of accounts where this has happened. And the investigators have written this down and reported it. Right.
Well, let's do this next clip with the John Doe one. It's another little kid, but it offers like a window into the bizarreness of like
this is
what
one of
he
the
remembers.
One of the strangest cases, I think.
Well, this boy's 3 years old. He disappears from his parents. They immediately call the sheriff. A big search starts, and they don't find him. I mean, they looked everywhere. This area doesn't have a lot of low ground coverage. It's a lot of big trees with a lot of open area underneath. But near the rivers and things and some of the trails, there is some shrubbery, but not a lot. So anyhow, we fast forward 5 hours. At about 11:30 at night, they find this boy sitting in the middle of a bush in a thicket, and he doesn't say anything. He's taken home. Parents talk to him. He's in sort of a stunned disbelief. So finally, the next day, they get talking to him, and they said, well, you know, explain what happened. And he goes, I really don't know. He says, I just kind of disappeared. And, well, where were you? And he tells this story that he is taken into a cave, and he thinks it's underground. And he says, I know it's dark outside, but when I'm in this cave, I could see the entrance, and it's light outside. And he says that he's with a woman that looks exactly like his grandma. And originally, he thought it was his grandma. But then he said that in the cave, there's a lot of other things that look like people, but they're all robots and they're not moving. And he says after a while, he figures out that this woman really isn't his grandma, even though she's really nice to him and very polite, but he believes she's a robot as well. He made some kind of comment about, there was some kind of light or sparks or unusual light coming from her head. And then he says that she was real nice until she started to get pushy, and she took out some sticky paper and laid it on the ground and told him he had to poop on it. And he told her that he didn't have to go, and she got mad. And he says, now, as I'm sitting there, he says, they asked him, what else did you see there? And he said he saw a lot of small guns and things around the outside perimeter of the cave, and they all had a lot of dust on them. So then you kind of fast forward a little bit, and the boy went to go spend time at that grandmother's house the following weekend. And he tells the story to the grandmother. Well, the grandmother then told us that 3 weeks before the boy disappeared, the grandmother and her husband were at that exact creek river spending the night. And they actually woke up in the middle of the night because the grandmother felt a pain at the base of her neck. And she had her husband look, and there was a small bloody spot at the base of the neck. And she says, I don't know if it's related, but I just wanted to tell you that I thought that was strange. I happened to be there where this point he disappeared, and he sees a grandmother, and I have this bloody spot on my neck. I don't know what to think of it. Make a long story short, the boy's fine, he's developing fine, he hasn't disappeared anymore. But that is probably the most unusual story that I've ever heard about a small boy disappearing.
Yeah, that is definitely, I think, arguably the most bizarre case. I think just all the elements involved there, and it's interesting because it's coming from a 3-year-old. So it's however their mind is processing what they're actually seeing. Mm-hmm. So what sounds so ridiculous, there might be reasonings behind what he's actually seeing. Right. But I think the poopy paper, sticky paper thing is still pretty bizarre no matter how you cut it.
Unless they were collecting samples.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I would think.
Well, it's such a bizarre detail for a child to make up, like
what sounds like he's going to defecate on this pad.
Yeah.
It sounds like it would be collected for a sampling purpose. Like a kid just
Making
imagining
that up.
that, it just seems like a bizarre.
Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't, unless he dreamed it all. You know,
Right,
That's
yeah.
but it is really,
Well, and the connection with the grandmother.
well, that's the weirdest part.
Yeah. So the grandmother was in that same area and
A
had
week before or something.
a puncture on her spine.
It was the base of her neck, I
Base
think.
of her neck, right?
Yeah.
So like
maybe they took some DNA
maybe they
and
cloned her. They had a clone robot.
Well, one of the arguments I
robot.
read about that, one of the aspect that she looked like a robot, and there was light coming from her head. I think it was the grandma herself who was thinking, as ridiculous as it sounds, maybe this person, maybe they had collected something from me and enabled them to create a hologram,
An image.
and that's why it like the shimmery kind of look
to make the child feel safe
To make
as
the
they
child-
collected the samples or whatever.
right.
Oh,
Bizarre.
it's
I mean,
weird.
that's definitely one of the hardest to digest, but it's. I mean.
It went down
It's
pretty
weird
easy
because
for me.
there's elements in that.
Yum
that-
yum in my tum tum.
There's elements in that story, like he saw light from outside the cave. Like there's a story that I'm going to discuss where it's a girl who she's missing for 46 hours. And she said she also was in a cave and it was light outside the whole time she was in the cave.
I thought it was in the woods.
In the cave, I think. But she could see out through the cave. Oh, we'll read it. But
So okay. Oh, you're gonna do that story?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like an interesting one.
Why don't you go ahead and do that one?
do that one?
Yeah.
Jump to that guy?
You should
iPad?
probably have your shit together.
I do. It's right here. We have to share.
It sounds like they're having some sort of gathering above us.
I know it would be nice to have a space that was devoid of
Free
what sounds
from
like being.
lunatics above.
I feel like we're like surrounded by plumbing in an ancient ship. You hear like these floorboards creaking above us as people walk by. You know, if you remove one of these drop ceilings,
matey.
if you remove one of the drop tiles from the ceiling, you can see the room above us. Like the wood floor has just like gaping holes in it,
Yeah.
where you can just see people walking around.
Jeremy the pervert.
Yes, I have a chair set up. Where
Well,
it's
listeners, that's what the sound is if you can hear extraneous noises as we're
recording. We
meandering through our episode.
apologize for the sonic periphery. Chris, have you found the frickin' story?
Yeah. Sorry.
Good Jesus.
Okay, this is the case of Lillian Carney. It was nearing the end of a Michigan summer in the year 1897 when a 6-year-old girl named Lillian Carney mysteriously vanished. Her parents had taken her blueberry picking in the late morning and had only been among the berries for a short time when they noticed their little girl was no longer by their side. Their concerns grew as they searched for an hour and could find no trace of Lillian. They reached out to anyone in the area who was willing to help them comb the fields and forests, trying to find their daughter. Night came and then dawn, with no sign of Lillian Carney. But by morning, they had over 300 locals lending a hand. They called her name for hours, searching the underbrush, briar patches, and creek beds, but were unsuccessful. Finally, after 46 hours, Lillian Carney was found. A man named Bert Poland had discovered her alone in the woods 2 to 3 miles from where she and her parents had been picking blueberries. Lillian seemed all right, all things considered, but she made a strange statement. "The sun shined all the time while I was in the woods," she said. This puzzled her parents and police. Not only had she spent 2 nights alone in the dark Michigan forest, but even during the days it had been overcast, with little to no direct sunshine. So,
Yeah,
it was
it's-
sunny the whole time.
It's just odd. Yeah, you're in the woods for that long, but the sun never sets.
Right, and she doesn't mention sleeping, and it reminds me of like old fae folk stories, you know,
Right, fairies
in the woods, you know, where people are taken for a while and the time doesn't seem to pass, and then all of a sudden it's days later, and then they
Right.
find themselves out with not much of an exact remembrance of what happened.
Yeah.
You know,
It's so bizarre.
yeah.
It reminds me of Hansel and Gretel, which is so scary.
Where the old woman wants to eat
especially-
them.
yeah.
Wants to eat
Cook
them?
them in the
What?
oven?
That's
Yeah.
so terrifying.
It's dark.
Like if that was real,
Yeah.
like I just want to
Maybe
eat
it was
you.
real.
Maybe it was
That's
based off a
so
real story.
scary.
Maybe,
Cannibals in the woods.
yeah, or creatures pretending to be humans.
It's
Yeah,
weird.
well, that's the whole crux.
Right.
It's weird to think how that stuff carries on. Like we use, when you're on a website, they used to have a thing on websites where if you were certain pages in, you'd click a little link at the top next to an arrow that was like helped you go back a page and then back a page to get out of where you came from. They're called breadcrumbs, only because of Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah.
Leaving breadcrumbs to find where you are. It's just interesting how that stuff carries forward.
Yeah.
And people lose track of where the lexicon originated. It
Yeah.
originated with cannibals in the woods.
Which is actually a reptile.
Yes.
Dressed up as a grandma.
Exactly. Who cloned your grandma
So creepy.
Yeah.
You want to do another clip?
Yeah, if we want to do a clip.
How about High Grass?
High Grass is a good clip. So this is a clip from, I'm going to tell you, because if any of you guys are hunters out there, you should check out this podcast. It's called Deer Hunt Big Buck Registry. We'll put it in the show notes. I got a couple clips from there. He did a great interview with David Paulides. This clip is from that, and I think it's one of the more interesting that kind of points towards a possible explanation for some of these disappearances that are so inexplicable. So let's roll some clip, John.
There's a lot of hunters out there that I've met over the years that have read my books and said, I don't know who to tell this to, but something really strange happened to me in the woods. Hunters are a quiet group, and they don't want to be looked at as their peers as being idiots or fools or whatever. But I was told this guy was hunting at about 11:05 in Colorado, and there's a lot of hunting for elk that happens above 10,000 feet. And there was high grass between knee and hip length. And he says, I'm walking along and I hear this strange sound coming from just out of sight over a knoll through the grass. And he says, I kept looking and I kept getting closer. He said, it almost sounded like a herd of elk coming towards me. And he goes, I kind of picked my rifle up and I'm slowly walking towards it. And he said, maybe 50, 60 feet away, all the grass is going down as though it's getting trampled by something large, but you can't see it, and it passes me and it keeps going. And he said nothing was distorted and there was no wind. He said it was the oddest thing he's ever seen.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
Right? An invisible thing that passes by you.
Especially since it's a hunter, like those guys don't mess around.
Yeah, you're familiar with the area. You've been in the woods for how long hunting in your past, and you experience something inexplicable like that, like something you can sonically hear as it passes by. You can see the foliage ahead of you being pressed down by something, what seems like moving next to you. And
it'd be hard to go out and hunt again.
Absolutely. Well, and that was kind of the paradox of this guy who I got that clip from, because it's a show on hunting, and he's like, I don't know how many of my listeners are going to want to go back into the woods after this episode, because we know a lot.
You can't protect yourself with a weapon if you don't know.
It's going to be hard. Yeah, unless you're have experience hunting or fighting against the predator.
Right. It's like
right. Ooh, that's the sound of the predator.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Predator. And there was an X-Files episode where people were being killed in the forest. Remember that? And there were these invisible things in the forest, and then you found out later it was some tribe who had evolved to become invisible, some ancient tribe. But it's funny, and I have it noted on there in the notes there, Jared, but doing some research, there's cultures all around the world that have these stories of these beings that live alongside us, parallel to us, but can choose to be seen or not. And in the Cherokee, it's like the Nihani or something, and then in Ireland it's Sade. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but all over the place, and they're always the same sorts of stories where
invisible entities.
In some cases, like those two, for example, continents apart, but they have the same sort of it's the same sort of idea where it's like drums pounding in the distance at night. These creatures seem to be hospitable at first and take you in, that sort of thing. It's just interesting how it plays through in different cultures, There
was another interesting story from David Paulides. I'll paraphrase it here, but I thought this was one of the more bizarre cases. This comes from David's friend who's a optical physicist. His wife they're both hunters, and his wife was a bow hunter. And she was hunting in a deer blind just a few miles away from their house. And while in the blind, she was texting her friend, and at some point she looks up and she sees something strange in the tree across from her. Can I get a little creepy campfire sound or something?
Oh yeah,
sure. Inspire the story. So she's in this deer blind, and she's texting a friend, and she looks up and she sees something strange. She's not quite sure what she's seeing, so she blinks her eyes a couple times, make sure it's not like a tear causing some kind of visual distortion in her eyes. But she realizes it's a visual distortion that she's seeing in the tree across from her. So she lifts up her phone to take a picture, and she starts freaking out because this thing is as it's in this tree in front of her, it starts moving from tree to tree. It's just like she can't quite see what it is. It's almost like this invisible thing, but she can see a distortion, so there's something there. So it moves across from different trees until finally it moves away. So she leaves there. She goes back home, and they're having company over. She doesn't want to get into the story because there's company there and she doesn't want to talk about it. It sounds crazy. Bizarre, yeah. But during the visit with the company, Dave's friend gets a phone call from his son who's at school, and they had band practice outside. And while they were having band practice, they noticed 3 hovering lights above them, just hovering there, before eventually shooting off at high speeds. And everyone in the band witnessed this. It was bizarre. And so he gets off the phone and he tells everyone at his house, his wife included, what happened. Eventually, the company leaves, and the wife tells her husband, I have to tell you this. The same time that those lights were there, apparently, I was in the deer blind and I saw this invisible thing in the trees, and I took this picture. And I don't know how to explain it.
Oh, she actually got a snapshot?
She got a snapshot. So what happened was, David's friend, who's an optical physicist, has friends at Verizon. And the phone is a Verizon phone. So he sent it to the tech people at Verizon who he's close to. They looked at the picture and they analyzed it. And while it's kind of blurry, you can't really make out what it is in the picture. The odd thing about it was there was too much digital information in the picture for it to be possible. So in other words, they verified that the picture came from this Verizon phone, but that Verizon phone was not equipped with the megapixels to allow a picture to be taken with that many megapixels and that large of an image for it to have been taken. So almost like this digital distortion, whatever was present that she was witnessing, had caused some sort of physical aberration that allowed more data to be included in the image. It's just a bizarre story. But it just reminds me of that, like, this idea of these invisible things. Maybe that's why a lot of these stories are inexplicable. You know, why things disappear. People disappear and you there's no trace and no warning. Like a lot of these situations with hunters is there'll be a person hunting the same tract of land, a property that belongs to them or their friends. They've been hunting for the last 50 years, and they go out hunting one day, they walk away from their friend for a short period of time, and as soon as they're out of the sight, poof, they're gone. And there's no trace.
Right.
It's one possible explanation, just some sort of entity that we're not familiar with. But yeah, think about the idea of predator.
Yeah.
You know, this creature that comes down and is hunting people for whatever reason and has an invisibility cloak. You know, you're hunting the most dangerous animal. I don't know. Maybe that's where that idea of predator came from.
Interesting.
Creepy.
That's the thing about these cases. Like, there's things like that where it seems like something that's possibly other dimensional or something like that. But then there's other cases, and Jared, I'd like you to read one of them there, where it reminds me of like the shape-shifting thing. Where,
a 3-year-old helped by the big black man?
Not that one.
Okay. Cuddled and comforted by a bear.
Yeah.
Cuddled and comforted by a bear. So this is one of the missing 411 stories from Paulides, or is this a different story?
I think it's a Paulides story, but it's old. I think there should be a date on the Google document when I referenced it, but just read the story.
Okay.
We are in a forest.
Okay. This is from Ida Mae Curtis. In 1868, a 3-year-old girl disappeared from her father's lumber camp in northern Michigan. After enlisting the help of a pair of professional hunters who happened on the hysterical search scene by chance, the men traced the little girl's feeble cries to a dense stand of brush. When the men advanced on the thicket, they saw what they said looked like a giant bear burst from it and run across the river, heading for the distant horizon. The men recovered the girl unharmed from the brush. She later told them that Mr. Wolf would not let her leave and had eaten her hat from right off her head, although he had also gathered berries and fed them to her. On the night of July 2nd, 1955, Mrs. Curtis, summoned by her distraught older children, arrived just in time to see what she and the children said was a huge bear cradling her 2-year-old daughter, Ida Mae Curtis, in its front paw as it scurried off on 3 legs from their tent in a lumber camp at the wild Kootenai National Forest in Montana. On July 4th, after a search by 350 backwoodsmen, searched by 350 backwoodsmen in heavy rain, Ida was found dry and safe in a crudely built shelter across a river, just 300 yards away from where she was taken. Ida would later relate to the best of a 2-year-old's ability, being cuddled and comforted by the bear during the time she was missing. The sheriff became so angry that he actually paid the Curtises 3 separate visits, demanding that they stop telling their story of a bear abducting and caring for their little girl. He told them, quote, "Quit telling the story. It could never happen. It didn't happen. And don't say it anymore." End quote.
Yeah. The argument there is it's not really a bear, because there's another story in there where it's a wolf that's walking on 2 legs, takes a girl, talks to the girl, tells the girl that she has to be quiet.
It makes more sense if it's a wolf.
Brings food for the girl, you know?
Right, makes total sense.
Dogman.
Yeah, just strange cases.
Well, it's interesting that the whole idea of the cop coming, almost like Men in Black style, saying, "Don't talk about this."
That's weird. Yeah.
There's a clip, John, if you want to play. It's called "Cover Up," and this is just one example of some of the reasons why you don't hear about this stuff, why it's not talked about.
I got a call from a coroner from one of the largest coroners groups in the United States, one of the largest jurisdictions. And this person said, Dave, you've stumbled onto something that we all know in our group. And there's 12 coroners that work for this city and county. And we all know something really weird is going on because we can't figure out the cause of death on a lot of these cases. And we're people of science. We should be able to figure this out. And many times the jurisdiction presses them to come up with a cause of death to soothe the concerns of the community. And this group won't do it. But there's a lot of small communities where the coroners give a cause of death just to soothe that cause. Politically motivated.
I love that outro, John.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that the coroners in that community are sensing that there's something that they're not being told.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many cases where they can't identify the cause of death, but they're urged to give an explanation just so that there's some sense of knowingness from the authority.
Right.
So people aren't scared. And that happens a lot. Like there's a term that actually Paulides talked about. It's called something like local statement for local consumption, which is the idea of you put out a statement for the people in the area, which isn't necessarily the full truth.
Right.
But it's kind of a digestible idea of what happened. So like
Crackers?
That's digestible.
it was a grizzly attack, even though there's no evidence of it actually being grizzly, but there's grizzlies in the area. And even though they found a skull, this is a story from that hunting podcast, they found a skull of this hunter who'd been hunting all of his life. He was an expert in wildlife biology. He'd been tasked to lead grizzly study teams and everything. And he disappears. They find his pack set up, his bow set up, everything by this tree, like he was resting, ready to call a moose or something for the hunt. And they find his skull, and it has bite marks on it, but it looks like an animal they couldn't identify was gnawing on the skull, but there's no evidence of a bear attack. There's no evidence of grizzly. There was bear scat with no evidence of clothing or human remains in the scat. But the coroner reported at some point, or the FBI actually, I think might have been involved, but whatever government agency was involved, they reported that it was a grizzly attack.
Oh, right.
And he had sources inside the investigation who said, I don't know who said this or leaked this, but that is not true.
Right.
They said this for local consumption, for there to be like an open and shut case.
Yeah.
So is that the Hunter Swamp story?
No, the Hunter Swamp story. It's actually a story. It's just a short story from the guy who did the podcast where I got some of those clips from. It was just an anecdote of strange things that happen when you're hunting. So if anyone listening is a hunter or has had experiences, call us and let us know. Give us your story. But if you want to roll that clip, it's just a short clip of strangeness on the hunt.
And I've seen things that I thought was very strange in the woods. Things like I sat on a deer stand for an hour watching a swamp and hoping something big would come by. And I'm watching. All of a sudden, this giant tree falls over in the middle of the swamp. And a deer jumps up because the tree fell and runs by me. Just a standard tree, totally straight up in the air in the middle of the swamp. What the heck? How does a tree that is totally fine for an hour decides to fall over and almost falls on the deer? Very strange. Very strange stuff. I can't explain it.
Yeah, so I mean, trees fall, right?
Yeah, that's what
especially one that's in the swamp. But what's interesting is that it almost felt like all that whole time he's there, it's fine, and then there's a deer that happens to go right underneath the fall line of that tree, and then the tree falls. That makes it a little interesting.
Then that's why I found it interesting too. Is there are a lot of stories where seemingly healthy trees that are identical to the trees around it will fall on prey or will flush out prey, or almost like threatening the hunter that's there.
That's creepy.
Yeah, like there's something invisible that's using that as a tool.
Or the woods is alive.
Or the woods is, I like that. Ents. It's like an ent moot.
They have their own intelligence and their own population control methods.
Oh, right. Too many deer. Let's just lay some trees down.
That's weird. Yeah, that's a very kind of a. I mean, there's probably so much weird stuff that goes on in the woods. Like, there's just this whole other universe. That's really where we came from.
Right, but we're so isolated from it now, which is so crazy.
Our area. It's like you might as well be swimming in the ocean.
Well, yeah, and you hear these stories of people getting like lost or people that are that hurt themselves because there's just, I feel like we lose respect. Like actually, my girlfriend was in Yellowstone working out there for a while, and she said people would go there as tourists, and they thought it was like a petting zoo. Like you could just approach the wild animals in Yellowstone.
Disconnection from nature.
Yeah, there's like a lack of respect, and it's not like they don't appreciate nature, but they don't really understand that it's
they don't
real.
have the fear they should have.
Right, because we don't live in it anymore. Now it's just like
Reminds me of watching Ellen.
Yes, it's just like
complete disconnect.
The Ellen mindset. Yeah, wherever
Ellen mindset.
It's we look at the wilderness now like it's presented to you in a movie, or it's like it's something that you can dabble in or go for a quick hike or whatever. But there's a rawness, a primevalness to the wilderness that I think
and it doesn't give a fuck.
Except
about
for
you.
Hunters, we're pretty much disconnected from that reality. You know, the safety concerns you need to take.
I mean, even compared to I was in Austin for a while, and from going to that city we live in a pretty rural area, especially mom and dad's place.
Right.
Like it's
in Ohio.
It's not remote, but it's definitely rural, and there's a lot of woods, and there's a lot of animals,
and there's caves.
Yeah, I mean it's it's not like we live in the middle of nowhere, but the town is like 500 people,
right?
And that difference is striking. Going from a city like Austin to coming back to a small town like this is like, it feels way more magical and mysterious than, I mean, Austin is it's just a big city. So you are completely separated.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some places that you can go, but for the most part, we spend 99% of your time
indoors.
Even the woods is not very isolated because there's just so many people. Like, you're bound to run across someone just walking on a trail or something.
Yeah.
But,
It's and that's why it's funny to me that we talk about we can reference all these cultures around the world who have these legends of these people that are invisible or that live alongside us, but they can choose to be seen, and they abduct us, whether for good reasons or bad reasons. And in today's world, we write that off because this doesn't fit into the mainstream science thing.
We also don't live out there.
We have no documented evidence. Well, that's my point. These people lived in these places. They lived in the forest. They lived among the forest, among the trees, among the animals, and they have the same stories in different continents around the world, and supposedly it didn't have contact with each other, but yet they have the same stories, and these different beings that lived in these different places have very specific character traits in all these different places in the world.
Right.
And so we look at all this and we go, oh, it's all myth and legend.
It's all archetypal.
We know better.
Right?
We don't live in the woods, but we know what's in there, but we're never in there.
It's just from the development of the human mind, archetypal, so that we protect ourselves from the unknown dangers of the stranger and the darkness and all that.
Right. It's temporal centricism.
I think there's some truth.
Just made that word up.
There's some truth to that, but I also think, I think if we just assume that's what it is, we're writing off a potential reality.
Absolutely.
Then you start to go, there's definitely dangers in the woods and stuff, but I think it's way scary to head into this technological Orwellian system that we're sort of creating for ourselves. Right. We're completely disconnected from where we came from. The new danger is just being completely forever separated from that part of our lives.
Well, that's the thing too.
We
I
just
feel like
live in technology.
It's the opposite ends of the same dangerous spectrum, right? We can Agenda 21 ourselves into these cities, and then maybe one day, like Logan's Run, someone escapes from the dome city and they find themselves in the wilderness and get eaten by a deer. There's something that they never knew existed. Like something that you
eaten
could
by a deer.
Something
a fanged deer.
Right, they get kicked by a deer, like an owl poops on them, and they die.
Fanged deer. That's scary.
Just the idea that we're going to get to a point where we're so unprepared for nature and we're so protected from it in these like city bubbles that down the road, or if we're just stuck in virtual reality, plugged into the Matrix, that's another future
awful.
Reality. You might be there now.
I'd rather die in nature than in
I think about it all the time when I think about my death.
You could be there now, John.
I always think I just want to crawl. Let's say I'm terminal in the hospital or something. I just want my last hour to be like me in the forest. I had to crawl or steal an ambulance or something and just get out into the field and then just lay and feel the sun.
Cancer Chris gets out of the emergency.
Cancer Chris.
I don't like the sound of that at all.
It's a new terrible nickname.
He just
crawls out,
flops out, and just starts crawling through the woods.
It's so peaceful.
Let me be in
nature. And he's just
nature.
weak and just dying in the sun, and then a wolf comes up and just starts eating him alive.
It'll be faster than cancer.
That's true. I don't know what should be more painful.
probably being eaten alive.
I like the Inuit version where they just shove you off an iceberg.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Now that I love that. The Inuit thing where like you get, is that true?
Well, that's the
Where like
that's what
the
I've
idea
heard.
is like the
Are you
as you
into
get,
it?
As you nice the ding ding. As you get older,
That's their bumper
when you
sticker.
reach a certain age, supposedly, I don't know if this is like just an urban legend or, but they would, if you got old enough, the respectful thing to do for your family, supposedly,
Oh, yeah,
was to
where you
step
just kinda
onto
go
like an
off.
iceberg and float away. I don't know how many like
That's
icebergs
way
they had like
worse.
harbored.
Yeah. No, I've heard of people like just going off into the woods when you get to a certain
That's another
point.
thing. Yeah.
Like a never-ending walkabout.
So freaking strange to think about.
But it
because
makes
it
kinda
becomes
sense,
a
though.
burden on the family.
Yeah.
But there's also a weird like sort of like meeting your maker.
Yeah, there's a
feeling.
coming to terms, and I
There's
think
a coming of terms
Yeah,
to
to your,
it.
with yourself and with your maker.
There's an empowering idea.
I'm
in that.
sure they also lived in a much more connected way with spirit, whatever
Yeah.
you want to label that. They constantly lived with the idea that they were going to die.
Yeah,
there was
they
no distraction from the end of their life.
They understood death.
They understood it and they were comfortable with it in a way.
It was
that
a
we
part
aren't
of
now.
life. It wasn't
Well,
something to run from. It was
I
something
think-
you
Right.
eventually do.
Like
They
obviously,
didn't put baby penis foreskin on their face to
keep
try to,
themselves younger.
to stall
Okay.
death.
no, but that's
Okay.
that's the thing that the idea. I think with the medical revolution, the technologies we have with medicine. We've moved into this era where we want to prolong life as long as possible.
And we don't talk about it at all.
Well, right. We remove
Except
that
in horror movies.
Right. So it makes it more terrifying to think
Right.
about death because it's so far removed. Put him in a casket. Let's bury him. No connection.
We put all our old people in homes, and we just
Right.
completely separate ourselves
And you
from
can't
all the wisdom of older people.
You wouldn't be allowed to go just walk off and meet your destiny
No, you
in the
can't even
forest.
have
That would be
euthanasia.
illegal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is strange, and I think
Because
like
we need that net Medicare money.
but I think that builds the fear of death. The way our society works
for
compared
sure.
to other ancient societies, because the longer you wait, the more you try to push it off because you do have the ability to, the more you become afraid of it because there's a potential to increase your longevity and to stay alive. So then you never accept it because there's always a new medication you can try. There's always a new surgery you can try. So you never spend time just trying to get ready for it until the last moments when they're doing the last, CPR or
Right.
the last
And you're like, no, I'm not ready, I'm not ready, I'm not ready.
right. No, because you don't have that time to just get ready for it. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's a tangent, but
Yeah.
Well, where are we at, guys? I think we've wrapped up this
I
topic
think
for
so.
now.
Yeah, I think that we covered.
there's one more story I want to tell, but I'm gonna. I think we should record it and we can drop it in post. But it's a really fascinating story, and it takes place not in our country, but in a remote jungle in
Botswana?
South America. I think it's actually South America.
Okay.
But it's fascinating, and it correlates to these sort of pattern things. We didn't get too much into the pattern stuff, but the idea that some of the really bizarre things, like oftentimes children are found with their shoes removed, but the body okay, and no determinable cause of death. Or they'll find socks tucked into the back pockets of pants. And even with adults in a lot of these situations, like the shoes are always taken off.
Right.
And often
Clothing-
found later up in a tree.
Right. Or clothing neatly folded.
Yeah, or clothing neatly folded, with no evidence of foul play. So just bizarre.
Right. Well, on that point, I don't think I mentioned some of the criteria for exclusion with all the stuff we talked about, all the stories you'll hear from David Paulides, and we'll probably do more stories in the future on this because there's so many. But some of the criteria they exclude is anything having to do with animal predation. If there's any evidence of an animal attack or anything, it's not
Let's dumb that language down for our
animal
not so-
predation. So a predator or an animal attack.
predation.
Yeah.
I was going to say for our not so smart listeners, but I just really
Actually,
wanted to know.
before the show, I repeated animal predation in my head a few times so I would remember the terminology. But yeah,
What
animal
was your
predation.
silly word you used last time for when blood is taken out completely?
Exsanguination?
No.
Exsanguinate.
Exsanguination.
Exsanguinate.
You said that a couple
Exsanguination.
times. You're like, look at the big
I learned that
words.
from an
X-Files
episode.
You're like,
Yeah.
but it was exsanguinated.
It was exsanguinated, though, right?
It was though, right?
Look at this word I got here. It's
Look at
exsanguinated.
this word I gotta get in. Get it in.
But yeah,
Oh,
so
Jesus.
there we go.
Sometimes I just get around these guys and I just don't know how to end it. It just goes on and on and
We get the voices coming out.
and the voice comes out and I just talk to my mother. I go home and I'm just like, I don't know how to end it with these guys.
Sad
It's just
situation to
their
be in.
stories are just continuations of other stories and they just
Going and going.
It's just, I don't, how do we end it?
That's I think that you just did.
Well, I think that
Oh, he's back. I'm sorry. He's
I
back.
think we should go ahead and record that story after the show and then play it next episode.
Right, I like
sounds
that.
like a good idea.
And if you liked that voice, you can hear more of it in our Patreon episode.
If you sign up as a subscriber, go to our website and click on the Patreon button, and you'll get to hear more of our Talkie Talk. Maybe we'll stick around after this episode and record an additional Patreon.
Ranger Steven!
We did a little off-the-cuff episode where we just do a little talk about other kinds of things, and so you guys should, if you're interested, sign up to be
forgot to plug our stuff.
Well, let's plug it now. Sign up to be a Patreon member.
End.
That's okay.
Yeah, okay.
Well, we can also in a break we could drop a preview, but
that's true.
Also thanks to all the new subscribers too on Castbox, YouTube. Yes, thank you to all you guys. Keep spreading the word because we want to grow the show,
and we need help growing it.
Yeah, I don't want to,
He just wanted a delivery drive for the rest of his life. Make it happen for us, people. Share it. Share it with your friends.
Keep doing it and
share it with your friends. Write a review. And pay us money.
If you can see John right now, he's hitting his fist on the chair. We want it.
Give us the dough.
We do appreciate everyone who's done that so far. It really means a lot, and it really does help us. And it does take a lot of time because I don't know if we've ever said this before, but we don't have a production team or research team. John's
the production team.
John does the mixing and mastering. We all do the editing. We were all building little bits for break music or montages and stuff. It's all stuff we got to spend our time on and try to somehow make rent at the same time.
It's all very much homegrown at this point.
Yeah. So if you guys keep supporting us, we can make this show bigger, better, and more often, and just keep doing it. So we're not going anywhere. Just keep supporting us, and we love you guys. We love you.
I love you, and
thanks, Mom. So say we all.
All right, we'll see you next time.
See you next time
on this episode of Belief Hole.